And so now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Erica N. Cardwell and Glory Edim. Erica N. Cardwell is a writer, critic, and educator who says being an art critic has always been about what I could learn. She received her MFA in creative nonfiction from Sarah Lawrence, and her work has appeared in Art in America, The Believer, Frieze, and other publications too numerous to mention. In 2021, she was the recipient of the Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant. Cardwell is also a member of the International Art Critics Association and is on the editorial board of Radical Teacher Journal. She is based in Brooklyn and Toronto, where she teaches creative writing at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. Wrong Is Not My Name is her first book. Erica will be in conversation with Glory Edim. Glory Edim is the founder of Well-Read Black Girl, a book club and digital platform that celebrates the uniqueness of Black literature and sisterhood. She was the editor of the Well-Read Black Girl anthology, which was named a Best Book of the Year by Library Journal. Her new book, Gather Me, a memoir in praise of the books that saved me, is published by Ballantine Books on October 29th. I'm also pleased to say that Glory is a colleague here at Politics and Prose, where she is the director of marketing. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to please give a big Union Market welcome to Erica N. Cardwell and Glory Edim.
Hello.
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 How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I want to say that I absolutely loved your book.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, congratulations on your accomplishment. And I really want to just jump in because I have so many questions.
Please.
And I know
Thank
we
you.
have a limited amount of time. But Wrong Is Not My Name touches on themes of art, identity, and Blackness. How did you arrive at the idea for this book? And was there a particular moment or experience that sparked the creation of this story?
Yeah. This is such a great question, and this is honestly the most asked question, but I answer it differently every time. I would say the style was one of the last things that came to me. So I was working on this book for about 8 years, and maybe in the 6th year, I realized formally what I wanted to accomplish. And so I think it really came down to merging the writing I was doing at home and in my personal practice alongside of what I was doing as an art critic and as a freelance writer. And so it felt like I needed to silo myself and do these things in separate lanes. But with my book, I realized I could do them simultaneously and collapse them into each other. And so it was interesting to begin to discover books that were doing a similar hybrid approach, that were mixing genres, that were working critically and writing personally, and that both could exist simultaneously. And we were just speaking of Saidiya Hartman.
Yeah.
I also was thinking of Dion Brand.
Yes, absolutely.
And of course, Christina Sharp. But in addition to that, I think Bell Hooks, of course, wrote very personally, but it's often not looked at as, like, her work is situated as theoretical because Dr. Bell Hooks, we must respect her academic and work and her scholarship. But she also, it should not be discounted or we should not ignore the fact that she wrote personally as well, and that her personal life and that memoir can be citational.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that was a part, as I was kind of learning that, I was writing that. So I was sort of learning simultaneously.
Throughout the book, there is this, I don't want to call it like interweaving, but it just feels like the storytelling and the criticism, they go together so well, they complement one another, and at the base of all of it, there's this level of vulnerability. And I kind of want to start with the title. The title "Wrong Is Not My Name" is very powerful. It's very evocative. And when I heard that title, so many things came to mind. It's just that I feel like that's a call to art. There's references in music. There's just like, there's also this call and response that I feel
Yes.
in activism too, when you're marching. Can you share the significance behind the title and you know, kind of elaborate on what you were just talking about, how that reflects on the things that you explore within the book?
Absolutely. So, "Wrong is not my name" is a phrase from June Jordan's poem about my rights.
Yes, yes.
And the line is, "I am not wrong, wrong is not my name." And I discovered that poem many, many years ago. And it was this phrase in particular, "wrong is not my name," is very incantory for me. Like, I feel like it's something that kind of repeats and is in rotation in my mind. And
It's very musical.
and very musical, and it also was very soothing and reassuring, because I discovered it and continued to rediscover it at a difficult moment in my life and in my career as a writer, and just in the world as a Black woman, feeling very, very cast aside in my nonprofit work, you know, as the story goes for so many of us. But I would say I also kind of find phrases in poetry and really bring them as keepsakes. I have some of them on my arm, tattooed.
We have to just tell us. Yes, we have to
So
read
I
it
have
out loud.
this tattooed here. So there's some phrases from a poem by Gloria Anzaldúa, and I have "Mi Diosa" here, and "Leila" and "Jaros Gamos." Like, just these phrases that all mean something to me.
Yeah.
And so I was really committed to the title of my book having that same significance, and knowing that this phrase, "wrong is not my name," is resonant for so many people, but I really wanted to put something that felt meaningful for me and has like a very secret significance too. And so, yeah, and also I think something that I feel strongly about as well is I want us to say the words written by June Jordan. I want us to be invoking her when we are thinking about literature and poetry, and I want people to understand that we come from a place and that she's a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. June Jordan is like a beacon for so many of us. Like, she sets the precedent when it comes to poetry and collective radicalism. Like, she just has such beautiful energy. So immediately when I saw that title, there's all these things that can come to mind. And I think I had one idea of what your book was going to be. And then once I started reading, I was just so blown away at your level of being very transparent but still, you know, the word my mom would say is sharp. Like, you just have like, you're so sharp when it comes to the way you do your storytelling. My next question really is about looking at the intersection of Black art and identity. You know, that's something you continue to explore deeply in each essay. How do you see art functioning as a tool for both personal and political expression, particularly for Black artists? You just mentioned June Jordan, but were there other artists that definitely motivated you to tell these stories in the manner that you did?
Yes, absolutely. So it's sort of a chicken and egg kind of conversation, like what came first, the art or the writing? And I think it kind of, the style came later, but the art was always there. And so I spent a lot of time being really fixated on James Baldwin as an early writer, and Jean-Michel Basquiat. And so I definitely wanted to reference. Oh, there you go. See,
I have a little crown tattoo.
Yeah.
We share the same birthday, me and
Oh,
Jean.
do you? Oh, that's really sweet. Yeah, so he was an early reference, and I kind of tussled with wanting to include him just because his image is kind of misused sometimes in pop culture, but I couldn't ignore the fact that he was so inspiring in the beginning. And then I got really interested, I'm just kind of flipping through the book, interested in including Black women artists who people have never heard of. And hi, Ela. And so I wanted to make sure that I was kind of building a canon that became really important. Making sure that there was a canonical framework to the ideas that I was putting forth in the book. And the first person I wanted to chronicle was my mother. I wanted to really bring her into the conversation as if she was an artist just like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Lorna Simpson and all of these wonderful waymakers.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that's a perfect transition to an excerpt I want to read from your book. Your mother's just spirit and her essence was just shown so beautifully throughout your writing. And there's a line where you write, or actually it's a paragraph, I have listened to people who have lost their mothers speak about them with a particular fondness of the space in which we find things beautiful, where remembering is enough. Grief will remake life into fiction as you move through it, as the character you embody, as you feel sad, especially when the dead never recovered from not knowing themselves. This could be the ultimate tragedy, an ending so extraordinary it must happen again and again until the dead are renamed. It may well be the expansive saturation of loss in every space of your life, or the feeling of a lukewarm shower in the summertime. It is the space it is the space where you are at once tender and full. Some people become open, some people make art. And it just is so beautiful. I'm like stumbling over your beautiful words because what I was trying to describe to you backstage was there's something about your writing that takes us into the interior so gently and thoughtfully, and you can immediately feel that essence of grief, especially as someone who's experienced it. I've lost my father, and that idea of just like, you can turn someone you love dearly into a story, and it's like it's part memory, it's part factual, but some of it can be a little made up too. It's like it's all of it.
Your imagination.
Can you speak to that? And your words are just so, you do it so well. And again, it's like the rumination of one's thoughts when they lose someone they love.
Yeah, thank you so much for reading that section. That's actually the last paragraph in the book, and that was one of the first essays I wrote in this book. I wrote that in 2016, and it stayed pretty much intact to end up being the last page.
Can you give more context to the Sharon Jones?
Sure, absolutely. So the last essay in the book is about my mother and the artist Sharon Jones, and Sharon Jones was a soul singer. And she was the head of she was the front woman of the band Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings. And so I had really made her into an archetype, into like a maternal archetype. And I felt really akin to her being like a critical presence in my life. And then I didn't realize how much I had kind of slotted her into that position as maybe a proxy for my mother until she started dying. And so I was loving my early 20s in New York City, going to see her perform at Irving Plaza for like $10 a show with my best friend. And she was a very enigmatic performer. People would describe her as like the female James Brown. And she would throw herself on the floor and catch the Holy Ghost and then jump up and then be dancing around. She just really had this wild electric energy. And then she got very sick and was really stricken by cancer. And she ended up she lost all of her hair, but she was really committed to going back on tour. And she went back on tour and was so ill. You can see some of the concert footage. She was really struggling. And then when she passed, I think this was when I made this connection, when I realized that I had kind of made her in parallel with my mother, because my friends called me with this news as if she was a family member to me. They were like, Sharon passed away. That's what Ben actually said. Sharon passed away, as if we knew her. And so that was recalling that was really the beginning of writing this chapter. And I wrote it after I had been at a residency in January of 2016 or 2017. Came back, and like 2 days later, I just wrote the whole thing. It just flew out of me. And then it stayed intact and ended up being the last chapter.
It was just so, I mean, it was the perfect way to end, just like, because every part of the book feels like you're coming along with you in this process of becoming and discovering and making these connections. You know, can you talk more about just how Black feminist thought plays a role in your writing? Because that was also a theme that I picked up, in particular with that last essay too. You know, just how the theory informs your essays and how you hope that readers will interpret that in your work as well.
Yeah, so I really wanted, as I said before, I really centered Black women artists, and I wanted that to be a central focal point. My mother kind of began that journey, and I wanted most, if not all, of the artists that I referenced to be Black women who weren't household names.
Yeah. Can you name a couple of examples?
Sure. So one of the artists is Adebunmi Gadibo. She makes art out of Black hair and plaster. I also mentioned Mark Bradford and Chitra Ganesh, who's a woman of color, and several others. I also, in terms of Black feminist theory, though, I really wanted to elevate Black feminist theory as a critical approach. That's how I do my own arts writing. And with that, I believe that, this is sort of a tried and true phrase, but the personal is political.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is it speaks more deeply to the fact that the personal is citational and therefore worthy of being included even in our critical practice, because it's not an objective experience for us to see art when we are experiencing life from an objectified position.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me also think, what is so powerful about this is once you write a book, it's part of the record, right? It's part of the written record. So you are doing your own part of just like stopping erasure, right? You're like saying the names out loud. You're making sure people are aware. Someone like me, when I see an artist that I'm not familiar with, I'm writing in the margins. I'm going to like JSTOR. I'm like going to the museum to see things. It just opens up and invites a new conversation. Can you talk about what challenges you think Black artists are still facing to gain recognition and respect for their work? I really would love to hear more about the way you critique work, especially when it comes to Black artists and artists of color.
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, I think the art market, is still really attached to quote unquote discovering artists at the end of their careers. Like, we had Sam Gilliam, who is a really fantastic expressionist artist, who suddenly in the recent years is starting to sell his art at auction, but he's been practicing for decades. And then, similarly with Harry James Marshall and Popel, who recently passed away. And these are male artists, but I think the art market kind of takes time to kind of get hip to us, but specifically to our abstract leanings. I think figuration is often the way that we're expected to create work. We are sort of reality depictions rather than having kind of the more subjective, abstract, hard to place. And so that's really important to me, to make it murky, play with the opacity, to be nonlinear, to be harder to read.
Oh, I love this. I'm like, it's making me think of all the artists that I love that fall on this very like nonlinear, or like even everyone loves Alma Thomas, and I'm just like, yes, like there's no like
local artists,
there's not like a real, like as you said, like real depiction. It doesn't, and even in publishing, I feel like that it mirrors the same thing. Like the stories have to be, stories that feel placed in reality versus more avant-garde or fictional fantasy.
I would also say too, this is making me think of Senga Ngugi, who I also wrote about. And Senga Ngugi is really famous for her conceptual practice and working with hosiery and household products. And she was one of few to say out loud, alongside of so many others, like Howardina Pindell, that, our art is not often featured unless it's political. It's like, if it's not figurative, then it's got to have a political lean. And that's also something that I try to move away from is if I see that that's kind of the mainstream story or the bigger story that's overarching an artist, if I'm writing about them, I try to write away from that. Or I seek out work that, again, has this very difficult to follow theme, that it's kind of off the beaten path. Maybe it's print work or collage or something that feels less, I don't know, replicable or something that's more difficult to pin down.
Yeah, I love that. I would also love to talk about just this idea and theme of healing and liberation being kinship within the story, and how you bring forth the context of trauma and resistance and joy within our communities, within Black communities, I should say. Like, these are things that are kind of in conversation with one another. Yeah. So some of the things that you are discussing, for example, your mother's death, there's a heaviness to them, but you're able to balance it all. Do you understand where I'm going with it?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll ask for more clarity, but I think that talking about grief in a or loss or absence, it's not just that we don't do it, it's more that we have this sort of cultural avoidance.
Yeah, or even timestamp. I feel like it's like you can only talk about it for this amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. I mean, when I was working on this book, so many people were like, "Are you still writing that book about your mother?" And I was like, I am. Yeah, I'm still thinking about it, but that happened a lot. In like close friends saying, "Don't you want to write something else?" Right. And I'm like, I am writing something else. And so I think I had to kind of break through that. I had to be my own support system with that because for a long time, I was feeling kind of lonely. I was feeling kind of like, oh, nobody wants to hear about this book anymore. Nobody thinks this is important. But I do think the healing process with art making is a really challenging thing to discuss because not everyone believes that making art should be about healing. And I definitely believe that there can be a source of therapy in writing and your creative practice. But I do think it's tricky when we set out to be like, I'm going to heal myself. Let me write journal entries to move through this. And it's really just a component. It's really just we do need the therapies. We do need
we need all the modalities.
Tall glass of water,
we need all the things. We can't just like write our pain away. But it definitely is a very powerful tool, and I think just giving voice to something and having it in this shape of, where you now have this beautiful book that others can experience and add to the story in their own way. I would also like to talk about, this is a question that can be a little controversial, but I guess from a reader perspective, because most authors are like, I don't think about the audience, but I'm always curious, especially because you are academic and you are a critic. You seem very intentional about the way you write words and make them persuasive, So when you were writing this book, did you imagine your audience, and how do you hope Black readers in particular engage with your work, especially when we're thinking about the archive? And then for folks outside of the Black community, right? Like this is this is something that's not just exclusive to one demographic. So were any of those thoughts coming across your mind? And it's okay if you say no, but I'm just curious.
No, yeah. I mean, yes, there was definitely a period where I was consumed by my audience, and then I knew that I would never finish the book if I kept thinking about what are people going to think, what is it going to be, and so a long time ago, a good 4 or 5 years ago, I promised myself that I would release that part, and so I'm going to be another one of these writers that says I don't think about my audience, and I really had to cross that threshold in order to finish the book. And so I really feel like this book is no longer mine, no matter, even though it is incredibly personal and has so much about both of my parents and my life in it, this isn't only my life. This is a part of my life. This is writing, this is art. And so once I could really see it as that, then I was able to get in there and write these persuasive, creative, syntactical words. I said, okay, now I can have fun. Now I can be curious with the text and the revision, and now I can kind of create a persona. This is what I teach all the time. The I on the page can be a persona. Let that liberate you as you get in there, rather than feeling like the I is the most honest version of you. You're being so vulnerable. It doesn't have to hurt. You can make art out of your life. And so thinking of the audience was a long, long battle, and then I had to let it go. And then in terms of readers, I definitely kept my sights on young Erica. The Erica alone in New York needed a book like this. So I wrote for her, and she is meant to encompass Black women readers. And I wrote for us. You know, I say in this book, they don't create grief books for Black girls, and I think this is my kind of discursive, loving love letter to Black women. And in terms of all of my other readers, I'm excited to bring you along on the journey and to see what connections can be made, because it's really going to have a life of its own, and it has had a life of its own. And I can't try to control that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is something, like you said, liberating about creating a persona and letting yourself free from any judgments or ideas, just knowing that you are writing your most authentic, self.
At that moment. Yeah.
Can you talk about, you did mention that it's been taking on a life of its own. What has the reception been like since the release of Wrong Is Not My Name? And have there been any responses from critics, that are, maybe that moved you or you felt surprised by, like going from like author hat to critic hat? Was there something they're like, oh, that reviewer?
They didn't like. Actually, so I have a few things to say about this. First, I've had some wonderful feedback. I've had the really sweet experience of having readers reach out to you. This is my small little book in the world, and I've had the most intimate experience of walking into bookstores and having the bookseller recognize me, or having book clubs reach out to me, or getting tagged for, there was a book club in Baltimore that was reading my book. So that feels really concurrent with how I want to experience this. I can be very introverted, and so in a very nerdy writer way. So I'm like, I like that. That's how I want to experience this. But I do have had some audacious experiences with people sending messages and telling me some kind of unusual reactions, just in terms of what it made them feel. It made them feel like a sense of duty or something. These are non-Black people, things that maybe they could have done differently in their life. It's been a little bit apologist, which is really surprising. And in terms of critics, I want to say this in as meaningful way as possible. I haven't had a lot of reviews, and that's because Black women's books are not reviewed. Yeah. And I say this I feel like I've had some great reviews, and people mostly speak structure-wise, because it's a very nonlinear book. But I think it's not because of my book that I haven't been well-reviewed. I think because people aren't reading Black women's books, or not reviewing them, I should say. We are reading them, but they're not being reviewed. So that's my little dig into the industry. I'm sure you know this.
I'm very aware of this. And I actually have a new friend that I met recently who's a critic as well. We've been going back and forth and having conversations, and she's actually in the process of writing her book. She is a person of color, and she said that having the experience of writing her book and now going back to like being, because she does art, literary, she does all kinds of stuff. So she's been thinking about that more, thinking about like, what am I reviewing, how, and she's also with a big publication, so she's like, I wasn't even giving this a thought because it was like, you're part of the system that there are certain books that are going to be reviewed.
That's
right.
Like
there's like an expectation, and that's like, I'm also just in my job doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's like, how do I step out of the cog and actually make a difference and find stories that are, less popular or, that need that extra recognition, because now that she's an author, she's very aware that her book probably will not, be reviewed, and she has the prestige of this title, but, women like her aren't typically reviewed. So it's like, it is this kind of moment where like, wow, like I have this position of privilege and power, and how am I actually using it? Because she's now an author,
Well, it's, this is like the real talk about the literary community. I mean, this is why you started Well-Read Black Girl.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I, in the space of our platform, we really focus on the craft and the writing and the development of different writers. So I have not embarked into like literary criticism.
Sure.
But obviously, like I'm so supportive, and I see all the gaps. Like there is this whole ecosystem. It starts at writing, and then it goes to editor and marketer and bookseller, and like publishing is so vast and so deep. And at the core of it, Black women and actually all folks of color need to be additionally supported. It's just how it works out,
Yes.
So, any critics watching, please.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
At the end of that rant.
Well, but I also think that Well-Read Black Girl holds a very specific position because of the lack of criticism, and because you're not a literary criticism outlet, right? Like I think it's serving that purpose because of the absence.
Yeah, absolutely. There is like a joy that we're able to hold, and there's obviously the visibility and the exchange, and just, I like to think of it as like a literary family reunion. Everyone's invited, we can like connect and support one another. We can vent when needed. That part. So there's just so many things. Not to go off track. I have so many questions. I also wanted to just talk about just craft, as you mentioned, your structure is, it's again very intentional. There was a flow to how you outlined the book and brought the reader in. I guess my question is around what was the most challenging aspect of writing this book? Were there any essays in particular that were difficult to write emotionally or intellectually? Could you walk us through that?
Absolutely. I'm looking at the table of contents. I mean, as I said, some of it was really fully formed and kind of flew out naturally. But I was.
You're so brilliant.
Oh, that's very kind. I mean, but I think, so even the first essay, Chicken Soup, 7 Attempts. So I wrote that in several parts over several years. And it was all kind of circling around the same theme. And so I wanted to figure out how to put it together. And that was a really big challenge until I discovered the essay by Janet Malcolm called 41 False Starts, and in which she writes about the artist David Sal, and there's 41 sections, and essentially they're all 41 beginnings to an essay. And so that's what I was saying to myself, I want to do this, I want to try this, and I want this to be the way that I'm envisioning it. It doesn't have to feel like a standard essay or anything like that. So it took a while, though, to kind of find the form for that one.
I love that. That's such a good backstory. Give us another.
Yeah, sure. And then I would say so Kara Walker and the Black Imagination was kind of the catalyst for the whole book, and I wrote that in 2017. It was published in The Believer. But it was definitely probably the last essay that whenever it was time to send to the editor as like, farewell book, I didn't know what I wanted to do with it 7 years later. So I kept going over it. I was like, what do I do? What do I do? So that one posed a lot of challenges because it was, again, a visitation with a previous self. Yeah. And so I instead decided to be in conversation with myself. And I was very inspired by this essay that Bell Hooks wrote. It's her in conversation with herself. It's Gloria Watkins is her name, and Bell Hooks is obviously her pen name, her academic name, and she puts Gloria and Bell in conversation. I can send this to you.
Please send that to me.
Yeah, and
I would
so
love to read that.
I was like, I had a lot of drafts where I was like, Erica 2017, Erica 2024, but then my editor was like, I don't know if that's working, and but so it ended up being very associative and kind of in sections. So
I love that. I definitely have to read that essay. That's
I'll pass it on
great.
to you. Yeah.
I want to take a moment. We're about almost at time. Sure. If anyone in the audience has any questions, any comments, accolades, this would be a great moment for that.
Anybody, yeah.
And I do want to give you an opportunity while people are thinking of their questions. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about any upcoming projects, any ways we can support you. Yeah. What are you exploring next? And I'm just really honored to talk to you. And the way you examine art and identity is brilliant. And I know your students are benefiting greatly from your scholarship. So yeah, what's next for you?
So I had all these big ideas that I was going to spend the summer working on my second book, and you know what I did? I took a good long nap. I let myself relax, and I only wrote about artists, and I didn't write about myself. It was really, obviously that's how I write, so of course I reference to myself, but it was no book stuff. It was all just reviewing and interviewing different artists.
And living your life.
And living my life.
That's
and
good.
Just chilling,
That's the great content.
So that's what's going on now. I am working on a second book. All I can say is it takes this theme of inheritance and goes a lot deeper. Okay. And in parallel to that is textiles. Oh. So I'm looking at quilts and fabrics and threading and the ways that story can be embedded into material.
Oh, I have a book for you. There's a book coming out in a couple of weeks. It's called The African Decor Edit. And it's like so beautiful. She traveled the world and looked at the makers of all these beautiful textiles and on the continent. It's really beautiful.
Please share that with me. Yeah. Any questions, comments? No pressure. Oh yes.
Here we go.
Hello.
So I'm just a random person who walked into the bookstore.
Great, thank you for coming. Yeah.
I guess I wanted to ask. If there was one thing that you would like audiences to take away from your book, how would you sum it up? What would that be?
Oh, how lovely. I love this. Thank you. Something I learned only recently is that the pain of grief is actually... It really shows you how much you loved the person. And so both of my parents are deceased, and so I really hope this is lives in the world as an act of love. And that feels really important. And that, I hope, is a takeaway that people will have reading it.
Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you for that question.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, and that was a beautiful response. Well, I do want to give, because you are a professor, I do want to, my last question will be, what advice do you have for emerging writers, especially Black women and people of color, who are navigating the literary world and seeking to tell stories that challenge the dominant narratives? So give it to us straight.
Okay. So the first thing is keep writing, and that feels obvious, but it's not obvious. Keep writing and keep collecting your writing. And there's a literary phrase about killing your darlings, which I hate so much. And I tell my students to preserve their darlings. So if you need to edit, instead of not marking them away, just put them somewhere, because you might come back to it. So just keep writing and save it all. And don't be embarrassed if your draft is 300 pages. Just save it all. I really believe in that.
Yeah.
So generating materials, my number one. And my number two is don't give up. Yeah. I know that, but this is Gabrielle Seville says this, Kevin Smith says this about what would the world be like if we had all of these books that never get published. Yeah. So you can't let that be the risk you're going to take to never have your book in the world. So really believe those stakes are high, and keep going. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Glory.
Thank you. This was such a beautiful conversation.
Really fun.
And
I'm so grateful.
everyone needs to get this book. I'm going to find a critic to review it.
Thank you.
Wrong is not my name. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, everybody.